Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to this week's episode of the Montpelier Happy Hour here on WVEW LP Brattleboro. I'm your host and producer of the show, Olga Peters, and this is where we talk about how everything in Montpelier shakes out for the rest of us. I want to welcome in the room, this is very special, my friend and investigative journalist, Leah McGrath Goodman.
Hi, everybody. I am one of Olga's hopefully favorite esteemed colleagues.
Yes, definitely.
We try to say esteemed colleague because it makes us sound a lot more professional, and we're very professional.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And we're here today as part of a multi-show sort of learning curve, let's call it that, where we all know that in the legislative session, a bill came forward called H.91, which was looking at a way to redo our response to homelessness and housing insecurity. And the governor vetoed this bill for a number of reasons. It passed the House and the Senate, but it did not pass the governor's office. And so I want to use this bill as a learning tool and a discussion tool because I don't know if you remember at the time, Leah, but when the bill was vetoed, a lot of people sat around going, why did this makes no sense. It seems to answer many of the concerns he was having about the motel program and doing away with the motel program and trying to find some efficiencies in the system. And so I thought this would be a great time to go through a bill. And then within a week or so, I'll be talking with some of the people who actually built the bill and to hear why they made the decisions they made and maybe something they wanted in the bill that couldn't go into the bill or something like that. And so my hope is in the big picture, we can learn more about how these things that govern our lives, these policies, come to be. And I think this is really an interesting time to be talking about this because while this was vetoed, if I understand it correctly, because we're in the middle of a biennium, this can come back off the wall if the House and or Senate feel strongly about it. So even though it's been vetoed, it may not be completely out. So we're going to read through the bill. And then, like I said, in the next week or so, some folks who actually built the bill will be coming to talk about it. Any thoughts, Leah, before we dive in?
I would like us to talk about why the biennium might make a difference. And I also just wanted to throw in a thought, which is I am personally interested in reading this with you because I like the idea of hearing what some of the proposed solutions are, even if this time around it didn't pass.
And any specific questions about why the biennium might matter?
Oh, what is the significance of the biennium? It sounded like you felt like it might mean that there'll be another bite of the apple.
Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you for that.
I also wanted to just have a reason to say biennium.
I know it's kind of a fun, weird word.
It's a great word.
It's like a weird word to say, but it's fun. So under the Vermont Constitution, we know that we have our legislative session essentially goes 2 years. So, and that's the biennium. So if a bill goes down in the first half of the biennium, either it doesn't get considered at all, it gets vetoed, it doesn't make it out of committee for whatever reason, it can be brought back in the second half of the biennium.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But if it does not come back in the second half of the biennium, then whatever happens the next legislative session, it's like the clock starts all over again and it has to go back to zero.
Okay.
And then work its way through the process where if it's halfway through the biennium, it can still start in the middle of the process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I also think J.D. Vance would not like the word biennium because he's so anti-woke. He would overly read into it.
Well, the funny thing is I think it's probably actually a really old word.
It is. It's an old word. They don't buy anything.
This is a good point.
Sorry, guys. That Olga should disclaimer to Olga.
Should we say now the views and opinions of everyone
Leah McGrath Goodman are not those of Montpelier Happy Hour.
The host and the guest, and nobody else, not the platform, not their employers.
I just want to say Olga and I did a radio show years ago for the Green Mountain Mornings. And I was told afterward that we were too flippant and a little too, meaning I was, it was something we were making light of something and it was political,
Oh
but it wasn't,
dear.
it was okay because you were doing the show and that was part of the show.
Hmm.
But I was representing, let's just say, a local financial institution where I was on senior management and I got a little talking to about don't be so flippant about making fun of anti-woke people. And I was like, oh, I was only kidding and not really. Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yes.
Leah and I often talk about how when you're a journalist, it sort of breaks you for the rest of the work
Or
life,
world.
the world. Yeah, because you're like,
Because you're like, I'm an equal opportunity critic. This is not about anti-woke people versus woke people. I will criticize all of you because
mhm.
I'm a journalist. And so my job is to stay like kind of in the sidelines as an independent um,
Well, and
critic and critiquer and not judgy, just noticing things, observing things,
mhm.
writing about things.
And talking about how things affect the community, and sometimes things that we hold very sacred as a community member may actually not be good for us. So someone
Mhm.
has to say the emperor has no clothes.
Right, right.
Hmm.
Even.
But when you're
Unless they do have clothes, and then we're wrong.
that would be very true.
But they usually don't.
But they usually don't. But when you are working for a financial institution,
You have to pretend they do have
mhm,
clothes. Yeah.
mhm, even if
Yeah.
they don't. Well, without further ado,
Yeah.
shall we get down to this?
Yes. Ready? Activate.
Mhm.
Right.
So here we are, H.91 as passed by House and Senate 2025. An act relating to the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program. It is hereby enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Vermont. Section 1 Findings. The General Assembly finds that, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2024 Annual Homeless Assessment Report, Vermont had the fourth highest rate of homelessness in 2024, in that 53 of every 10,000 Vermonters are experiencing homelessness, with only Hawaii, New York, and Oregon experiencing higher rates. 2. According to the Vermont Homeless Management Information System, as of March 2025, there were 4,971 individuals who were homeless in the state, 1,105 of whom were children. 3. According to the Vermont 2024 point in time count, there were approximately 3,458 unhoused individuals in Vermont, which represents a 300% increase over the 1,110 unhoused individuals prior to the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. 4. According to the Vermont 2024 point in time count, over 35% of those Vermonters experiencing homelessness were unhoused for more than a year, and over 72% were unhoused for more than 90 days. 5. According to the Vermont 2024 point in time count, Black Vermonters are 5.6 times more likely to be unhoused as compared to white Vermonters. 6. The 2024 Vermont Housing Needs Assessment notes that 36,000 primary homes are needed in Vermont between 2025 and 2029, 3,295 of which are needed to address homelessness. 7. The 2024 Vermont Housing Needs Assessment notes that, quote, half of all Vermont renters are cost burdened, and 1 in 4 pay more than 50% of their income on housing costs, putting them at a risk of eviction, end quote, which, quote again, is heightened by Vermont's rental vacancy rate of 3%, which is well below the 5% rate of a healthy market, end quote. 8. Since 2020, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board has facilitated construction of 170 new single-family home ownership units and 269 new shelter beds. And 9. The 2024 Vermont Housing Needs Assessment notes that half of all Vermont renters are cost burdened, and 1 in 4 pay more than 50% of their income in housing costs, putting them at a high risk of eviction, which is heightened by Vermont's rental vacancy rate of 3%, which is well below the 5% rate of a healthy market. End quote.
I think those last two sections were the same.
I believe they
were
were.
repeated.
I believe they were, but I read them just in case there was a reason.
They were worth repeating. They bore repeating. So this is section 2, legislative intent of this bill, H.91. A, we're going into letters. A, it is the intent of the General Assembly that unsheltered homelessness be eliminated and that homelessness in Vermont be rare, brief, and non-recurring. B, it is the intent of the General Assembly that the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, mouthful, established in 33 VSA Chapter 22, is a step toward ensuring that 1, homelessness be reduced in Vermont and interim shelter opportunities be available to provide a stable pathway to permanent housing for all Vermonters experiencing homelessness, including safe shelter options for individuals living in unsheltered homelessness. 2, Vermont increase the supply of shelter, emergency shelter, as well as permanent supportive housing that meets the specific needs of individuals. 3, community components of all shelter types are integrated in a systemic manner. 4, night-by-night shelter relocation between interim shelter sites and other disruptions in housing stability be eliminated to the extent possible. 5, Vermont's emergency housing statutes, rules, policies, procedures, and practices be modeled on housing first principles where appropriate. 6, non-congregate shelter be used to the extent possible. And 7, Vermont reduce reliance on the inefficient use of hotel and motel rooms to shelter participating households and expand the use of emergency shelters throughout the state for this purpose. C, it is the intent of the General Assembly that 1, the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, established in 33 VSA Chapter 22, replaces the provision of emergency housing through the General Assistance Program, established in VSA 33 Chapter 21, and the Housing Opportunity Grant Program beginning in fiscal year 2027 and on an ongoing basis. And 2, in fiscal years 2027 and 2028, emergency shelter services funded through the Housing Opportunity Grant Program in fiscal year 2025 be funded at a level equivalent to or greater than fiscal year 2025 expenditures. Next section.
Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, effective July 1st, 2025. I want to break here quickly and just let listeners and viewers know that you'll be hearing some dates, and that's because they were looking at how to phase in different parts of this program. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you hear different dates come up. So, effective July 1st, 2025. Section 3, 33 VSA, Chapter 22, is added to read. Chapter 22, Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program. Subsection 2201, short title. The program established in this chapter may be cited as VHARTH or the VHARTH program. Less of a mouthful.
Much better.
Subsection 2202, purpose. It is the purpose of the General Assembly to 1, replace the provision of emergency housing through the General Assistance Program established in Chapter 21 of this title and the Housing Opportunity Grant Program, and use funds and resources previously attributed to these programs and any other identified state and federal monies to fund the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program established in this chapter. 2, reduce reliance on the inefficient use of hotel and motel rooms to shelter participating households and expand the use of emergency shelters throughout the state for this purpose, and 3, assist in maintaining housing for households at risk of homelessness and transition households experiencing homelessness to permanent housing. Subsection 2203, definitions. Used in this chapter, 1, at risk of homelessness, means precariously housed without sufficient income, resources, or support to prevent homelessness. 2, community action agency, means an agency designated pursuant to 3 VSA Chapter 59. 3, community-based shelter, means a shelter that meets the department's standards for the operation of shelters. 4, department means the Department of Children and Families. 5, extreme weather event means extreme hot or cold temperatures or weather events such as hurricanes, flooding, or blizzards that create hazardous conditions for outdoor habitation by humans. 6, homelessness means lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, facing imminent loss of primary nighttime residence, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, or otherwise defined as homeless under federal law. 7, a household means an individual and any dependents for whom the individual is legally responsible who are domiciled and intend to stay in Vermont, as evidenced by an intent to dwell in Vermont and return to Vermont if temporarily absent, coupled with an act or acts consistent with that intent. Household includes individuals who reside together as one economic unit, including those who are married, parties to a civil union, or unmarried. 8, unsheltered homelessness means sleeping in a location not designed for ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation. Subsection 2204, regional advisory councils. Each community action agency shall convene a regional advisory council composed of individuals and organizations in the community action agency's region. The membership of each regional advisory council shall reflect, to the extent possible, the growing diversity among Vermonters, including individuals who are Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, as well as regards to socioeconomic status, geographic location, gender, sexual identity, and disability status. 1, members of an advisory council shall include individuals with lived experience of homelessness, local housing coalitions, or a local continuum of care serving as local housing coalition, other organizations providing services in the region, municipalities, statewide homelessness organizations, the Agency of Human Services Field Services Director, and any other representatives of the agency as needed. That was a mouthful. 2.
Take a breath.
We've got 33 pages to get through.
Yeah.
Members of a regional advisory council may include community and state partners, housing providers, providers of coordinated entry, continuums of care, faith-based organizations, and other individuals or organizations as needed. Each regional advisory council shall provide advice and recommendations to the Community Action Agency in its region regarding the design and implementation of the program. Each regional advisory council shall meet on at least a quarterly basis. Members of a regional advisory council who are not participating in their professional capacity shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement of expenses as permitted under 32 VSA, subsection 1010, for not more than 8 meetings annually. These payments shall be made from monies distributed to the relevant community action agency by the department. Next.
All right. Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, effective July 1st, 2026. Section 433 VSA, Chapter 22 is amended to read, Chapter 22, Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program. 2203 definitions as used in this chapter. What is that?
Subsection.
Oh, subsection 2203. Part 2, Community Action Agency means an agency designated pursuant to 3 VSA Chapter 59, or the entity or entities otherwise authorized by the department pursuant to Section 2205 of this chapter to fulfill the duties of a community action agency under this chapter. That's a tough one. Subsection 2204, Establishment, Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program.
Why they're not calling it VHearth?
I know, I'm going to just want to call it VHearth.
I think we can do that.
So VHearth, subsection 2204, the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, there we go again, is established in the department to provide services to households that are homeless or at risk or are becoming homeless to the extent funds exist. 1, the department shall select and enter into an agreement with a statewide organization that has population-specific service experience to provide or cause to be provided supportive services and shelter to those households that are experiencing or have experienced domestic or sexual violence. 2, all other participating households shall be served or through a community action agency responsible for a geographically distinct region of the state. Community action agencies participating in the program shall provide or cause to be provided supportive services, extreme weather event shelter, and emergency shelter. Subsection 2205, authorization process, reauthorization review. The department shall select, this is A, the department shall select and enter into an agreement with a statewide organization to provide or cause to be provided, I'm just going to say provide, guys, supportive services and shelter to those households that are experiencing or have experienced domestic or sexual violence. The department shall conduct regular reviews of the statewide organization to ensure compliance with this chapter. The statewide organization may be subject to corrective actions by the department if, within the constraint of appropriated resources, it no longer meets the requirements of this chapter or has failed to adequately meet the needs of households that are experiencing or that have experienced domestic or sexual violence. If the statewide organization cannot fulfill its responsibilities under this chapter, the department shall work with another entity to ensure that there is not a gap in services. B1, the department shall authorize a community action agency to serve households that are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless in a geographically distinct region of the state if it meets the criteria in this section. If a community action agency cannot fulfill those responsibilities under this chapter, the department shall work with other community action agencies or other appropriate community entities to ensure there is not a gap in services in a community action agency's region. 2, a community action agency providing or causing to provide services in accordance with this chapter shall have A, existing or planned infrastructure to support households in the region, including an established leadership team, a human resources staff, and the ability to receive grant funding and issue subgrants. B, the ability to meet the department's reporting requirements, including having a past history of reporting compliance. C, the capacity to perform or cause to be performed the core services pursuant to Section 2206 of this chapter. D, the capacity to seek and accept charitable contributions, grants, and services of volunteers, including money, clothing, and furniture. E, any outcome measures established in this chapter. And F, community connections, that is, with other providers in the region, including local housing coalitions, housing providers, providers of coordinated entry, continuums of care, faith-based organizations, and providers of services to individuals who are older Vermonters, individuals who have disabilities, a substance use disorder, a mental health condition, individuals re-entering the community after incarceration, individuals transitioning from care and custody of the Commissioner for Children and families with children. And G, the ability to provide plain language communications to households receiving these services. 3, Not less than every 3 years, the department shall conduct a reauthorization review of each community action agency, providing or causing to provide services pursuant to this chapter. An organization may be subject to corrective actions by the department if, within the constraint of appropriated resources, it no longer meets the requirements in subdivision 2 of this subsection or have failed to adequately meet the needs of households in the region that are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Lack of compliance may result in the department deciding not to reauthorize the community action agency. The department may review progress of any previously required corrective actions and may review community action agency performance between reauthorization reviews. And I'm going to hand this to Olga so she can have a go.
Subsection 2206 V Hearth Core Servitive.
V-Hearth.
V-Hearth.
We're there. We've made
services. We made it. A, the department shall enter into an agreement with a statewide organization with population-specific experience serving households that are experiencing or have experienced domestic or sexual violence. The organization shall provide or cause to be provided various shelter and case management services that support households. B, each community action agency shall offer or cause to be offered, in collaboration with community partners, each of the following services within the region. Supportive services including intake assessments and services for diversion from homelessness, which shall include regional intake shelters unless the department and community action agencies agree otherwise. Household needs assessments, individualized household plans to address identified needs, housing navigation services, assistance obtaining and retaining housing, including financial assistance, landlord-tenant outreach, education, and conflict resolution, navigation to other services and supports as identified in the household's housing plan, including economic benefits, peer-supported services, job training and employment services, services related to disability and independent living advocacy, and referral to healthcare assistance such as treatment for mental health conditions and substance use disorder as provided by the designated and specialized service agencies and preferred providers, respectively, or other providers, and progress monitoring and interventions. Just a quick side note, one thing I think that's interesting about what I just read is it does kind of look at what are some of the ways people become homeless, like a bad relationship with a landlord, and is trying to kind of like catch those threads. 2, the operation of extreme weather shelters, which may include time-limited congregate accommodations and may be provided through agreements with municipalities or other entities, utilizing available data and considering geographic access to prioritize funding for this purpose. 3, the operation of emergency shelters in a manner that builds upon the federally required community planning process and prioritizes households in need of the services of an emergency shelter, which may include community-based shelters, temporary use of hotels and motels, lease agreements for full or partial use of an existing building, need-specific shelter arrangements, master grant leases, the development of shelter capacity, or other arrangements, or combinations of arrangements that comply with the intent of this chapter. Subsection 2207, use of hotel and motel rooms. This gets to the crux of the matter, I think. A, it is the intent of the General Assembly to decrease reliance on hotel and motel rooms for emergency housing. Annually, as a shelter capacity increases and the number of households experiencing homelessness decreases in each region of the state, the use of hotel and motel rooms for emergency housing in that region shall decrease. Annually, as part of the department's budget presentation, the department shall set goals for increased housing capacity, including permanent supportive housing, permanent affordable housing, and shelter beds, some of which may be population specific, in addition to proposed corresponding decreases in the use of hotel and motel rooms. The department shall provide data pertaining to the percentage of increased shelter capacity from the previous fiscal year in each region, and how that increase impacts the corresponding hotel and motel room usage for emergency housing in each region pursuant to this subsection for the purpose of informing regional planning and expectations. B, if hotels and motels are used to provide emergency shelter pursuant to this chapter, the hotel and motel operations shall comply with program rules and the following rules. The Department of Health Licensed Lodging Establishment Rule, and it cites where in the legislation you can find it. Department of Public Safety, Vermont Fire and Building Safety Code. C, annually, the department shall propose hotel and motel rates as part of its budget presentation for approval by the General Assembly. A community action agency shall not pay or cause to be paid with state monies a per room, per night basis that exceeds the rate approved by the General Assembly. D, if a hotel or motel is being utilized, a community action agency or entity under contract with a community action agency shall ensure relevant support services established pursuant to subdivision 2206B1 of this chapter. 2, shall enter into agreements for the use of blocks of hotel and motel rooms and negotiate the conditions of use for those blocks, including access for providers of case management and other supportive services. 3, shall prioritize the use of hotel and motel room agreements over individual per room, per night hotel or motel room use, unless it is not appropriate to a household's needs. 4, may use population-specific placements to the extent certain populations are not isolated from the wider community served through the program. And 5, shall not utilize hotels and motels outside the community action agency or entity's region unless approved by the department or in a written memorandum of understanding between community action agencies.
Subsection 2208, B. Hearth, duties of the department. A, the department and the Agency of Human Services shall have statewide responsibility for meeting the intent of this chapter, including statewide planning, system development, and the involvement of all the agency's departments. B, for the purpose of providing administrative oversight and monitoring of the program established in this chapter, the department shall 1A, maintain guidance regarding when extreme weather event shelters shall be operated, including flexibility for regional weather conditions, and B, maintain a website with the locations of all extreme weather event shelters. 2, include as part of any review of a community action agency required pursuant to 3 VSA Chapter 59 of the Community Action Agency's ability to perform the requirements of this chapter. 3A, consult with the community action agencies and statewide organization serving households that are experiencing or that have experienced domestic sexual violence to develop appropriate resource allocations and methods for adjustment that take into account available data, the presence of community-based providers, and customary resource allocation methods, economic indicators, rate of homelessness, rental agency rates, and other variables as appropriate. And B, annually distribute funding to each community action agency and the statewide organization serving households that are experiencing domestic or sexual violence using the allocation formula developed pursuant to subdivision A of this subdivision B3, or if the department and community agencies agree, disperse a joint allocation for all community agencies, which the community action agencies shall determine how to distribute amongst themselves. 4, consult with the community action agencies and the statewide organizations serving households that are experiencing or have experienced domestic and sexual violence to develop appropriate measures and methods for the accountability of the community action agencies and the statewide organizations' execution of duties under this chapter, including the provision of any previously agreed upon information to enable the department to evaluate the services provided through grant funds, the effect on households receiving services, and an accounting of expended grant funds. 5, to provide support and technical assistance to the community action agencies, other agency partners, and statewide organizations serving households that are experiencing or have experienced domestic or sexual violence. 6, identify specific administrative resources that could be transitioned to community operations. 7, develop and maintain standards for the core services listed in Section 2206 of this chapter, including the operation of community-based shelters. And 8, adopt rules pursuant to 3 VSA Chapter 25 in consultation with the community action agencies and the statewide organizations serving households that are experiencing domestic or sexual violence as appropriate for the implementation of this chapter, including rules that address reauthorization standards under subsection 225A and subdivision 225B3 of this chapter, and accommodation for individuals with a disability. Subsection 2209, you want to have a go?
Sure. This is the Regional Planning Needs Assessment. As part of the plan, required every 3 years pursuant to 3 VSA subsection 3904, and the federally required planning and needs assessment for the continuums of care, the community action agencies shall develop a regional needs assessment and planning process in collaboration with community and state partners for use in each community action agency's region to inform future plans addressing housing and homelessness in each region of the state. The regional needs assessment and planning process shall include 1, addressing progress in reducing the number of households experiencing homelessness in a region. 2, assessing the rate of households placed in permanent housing return to homelessness and the underlying reasons. 3, identifying resources developed and utilized in the region to address homelessness and efforts to improve the equitable distribution of these resources in the region. 4, reporting the rate of household participation with coordinated entry processes and case management services. 5, identifying system gaps and funding needed to address those gaps, including periodic inflationary adjustments. And 6, utilizing data, including Vermont's point-in-time count, coordinated entry assessment results, and community conversations. Every 3 years, each community action agency shall submit plans developed pursuant to this section to the department in a format prescribed by the department and to the regional planning committees in that region. Upon receipt of the plans, the department shall consolidate the results of these reports and submit the consolidated report to the House Committee on Human Services and to the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare. Reporting requirements, subsection 2210. On or before the last day of every 3rd month, the department shall post a report on its website in consultation with the community action agencies and the statewide organization serving households experiencing domestic or sexual violence, addressing 1, the number of households served through the program by household size and, if applicable, by eligibility category, region, service provider, and core service category. 2, cash income and non-cash benefits by source. 3, changes in capacity for shelter beds, nursing homes, and residential care homes since the previous reporting period. 4, the number of diversions from homelessness made during the previous reporting period. 5, the number of households whose intake assessment indicated a potential need for services from each department within the agency. 6, the number of households that have been successfully transitioned to permanent housing since the previous reporting period, the types of housing settings in which they have been placed, and any supportive services they are receiving in conjunction with their housing. 7, the number of households returning to homelessness after placement in permanent housing, and 8, an inventory by amount and purpose of all subgrants issued by the statewide organization serving households households experiencing or who have experienced domestic or sexual violence, and by each community action agency.
Subsection 2211, Regional Advisory Councils. Implementation Planning and Initial Regional Assessment. Section 5, VHARTH Implementation Planning. A, on or before October 1st, 2025, that's coming very soon, the Department for Children and Families, in collaboration with the community action agencies and the statewide organizations serving households that are experiencing or that have experienced domestic or sexual violence, shall submit the first of 2 written implementation plans to the House Committee on Human Services, the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare, and the Joint Fiscal Committee, outlining its initial plans for the implementation of VHARTH, established by 33 VSA Chapter 22 on or before July 1st, 2026. Specifically, the first implementation plan shall include 1, a process that community action agencies, in coordination with the department, shall use to conduct regularly occurring regional need assessments and develop future regional plans, including consideration of the municipal needs. 2, recommended performance measures to evaluate the community action agencies and the statewide organizations serving households that are experiencing domestic or sexual violence in carrying out their duties under 33 VSA Chapter 22, including A, the provision of any previously agreed upon information to enable the department to evaluate the services provided through grant funds, the effect on household receiving services, and an accounting of expended grant funds. And B, performance measures that may be specific to an individual region of the state or provider. 3, recommended eligibility for each of the core services listed in 33 VSA 2206. 4, guidance regarding when extreme weather event shelters shall be operated, including flexibility for regional weather conditions. 5, a timeline for the implementation of core services listed in 33 VSA 2206 for the first 6 months of fiscal year 2027. 6, recommended intake and assessment processes to determine appropriate shelter and services for households based on program eligibility. And 7, a recommended process to enable an unwilling community action agency to opt out of a participation in the program in a manner that gives the state adequate notice. B, on or before January 15th, 2026, the Department for Children and Families, in collaboration with the community action agencies, regional advisory councils, established pursuant to 33 VSA subsection 2204, any other relevant department of the agency, and the statewide organization serving households that are experiencing or that have experienced domestic or sexual violence, shall submit the second of 2 written implementation plans to the House Committee on Human Services and the Senate Committee on Health and Welfare, outlining its initial plans for the implementation of the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, VHAR, established by 33 VSA Chapter 22 on or before July 1st, 2026. Specifically, the second implementation plan shall include recommendations and information on the following. 1A, funding allocations among the community action agencies and other providers, including for services specific to households that are experiencing domestic or sexual violence. And B, the distribution of fiscal year 2026 appropriations pursuant to Section 8 of this Act. 2, additional state and federal funding and other resources identified for the program. 3, establishing an appeals process that includes a hearing before the Human Services Board and an option for an expedited appeals process. 4, the role of 2011 within the intake system. What is 2011? That seems, I don't, 211.
211.
Oh,
That's
211.
the emergency number you can call.
211 is the emergency number, guys. I should have said it that way.
Yeah, for state services, not fire and police.
I've never used it, so I didn't know what it was. Good to know. 5, whether access to all or some services should include an expectation regarding household participation in case management services or other expectations such as night limits on the use of hotels and motels, and if so, what elements and in what circumstances participation in the case management services or other expectations should be applied. 6, whether the use of emergency shelter should include financial participation, and if so, what that participation should include. 7, appropriate intake and assessment processes for the verification of residency homelessness and homeless household income. 8, how to best ensure that there is equitable access to shelter and supportive services for households experiencing homelessness. 9, the number of housing vouchers that Vermont lost in the past year if the data is available. And 10, any anticipated challenges requiring a legislative solution. I need to review section
Yes.
6.
So section 6, interim and final needs assessment plans. Prior to the enactment of the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program on July 1st, 2026, the statewide organization serving households experiencing or that have experienced domestic or sexual violence and community action agencies shall conduct initial needs assessments in accordance with the process developed in Section 5A1 of this Act. On or before January 15th, 2026, the community action agencies shall submit one comprehensive progress report, and the statewide organization shall submit a separate report to the House Committees on Appropriations and on Human Services and the Senate Committees on Appropriations and on Health and Welfare, including estimated fiscal year 2027 budget proposals, estimated costs of administering the program, and an analysis of any barriers to generating additional shelter and permanent housing in the region. So this is talking about a lot of oversight of the program. On or before April 1st, 2026, the statewide organization shall submit a report, and the community action agencies shall submit a separate comprehensive report detailing the results of each region's needs assessment and implementation plans, which shall not exceed the budgetary proposals provided in the January 15th, 2026 progress report to the House Committees on Appropriations and on Human Services and the Senate Committees on Appropriations and on Health and Welfare, and to the regional planning committees in the region. The initial needs assessment conducted pursuant to this section shall include: 1, addressing progress in reducing the number of households experiencing homelessness in a region, assessing the rate households placed in permanent housing return to homelessness and the underlying reasons. 3, identifying resources developed and utilized in the region to address homelessness and efforts to improve the equitable distribution of these resources in the region. 4, reporting the rate of household participation with coordinated entry processes and case management services. 5, identifying system gaps and the funding needed to address those gaps, including periodic inflationary adjustments. And 6, utilizing data, including Vermont's point-in-time count, coordinated entry assessment results, and community conversations. I'm going to pause here. We are on page 26 of the bill as it passed, the House and Senate. The next few pages we're going to skip because they are updating language in like the definition of what is a community action agency, the roles of the Economic Opportunity Office, that type of thing. So you can go to pages 26 through 33 or 26 through 28 if you're curious about that part of the bill. So we will pick up again at subsection 3904, Community Action Agency Plan. Each designated community, and this is page 29 if you're following along at home. Each designated community action agency shall determine the need for activities and services within the area served by the agency and shall thereafter prepare a community services plan that describes the method by which an agency will provide those services. The plan shall include a schedule for the anticipated provision of new or additional services and shall specify the resources that are needed by and available to the agency to implement that plan. The community services plan will be completed every 3 years and updated annually. The plan shall include the regional needs assessment required under 33 VSA 2209. I'm going to skip page 30 on Community Action Agencies Administration. Again, it's like how the work gets done. And we are going to pick it up at appropriations.
I really wanted to read about administration.
Uh-huh.
I think that was a merciful move, actually.
I thought so.
Yeah. We don't need to know how all the sausage is made. Section A, appropriation, transition, planning. Those are supposed to be two separate thoughts. I made it sound like one. A, in fiscal year 2026, $7 million of one-time funding is appropriated from the general fund as followed. One, we need to emphasize that this didn't pass. Unfortunately, it was vetoed, and I shouldn't even say unfortunately.
It was vetoed.
It was vetoed is what I want to say. So these dollars and cents you're going to hear, these are not happening right now.
But this is what was proposed.
Yeah, we're reading about what was proposed. So one, $5.85 million to the Department for Children and Families to plan for the implementation of the VHEARTH, which shall be distributed to the community action agencies on a mutually agreed upon schedule as needed. That would be the portion of the $7 million. Two, $400,000 to the Department for Children and Families for distribution to the statewide organization serving households experiencing domestic or sexual violence. Three, $515,000 to the Department of Health for distribution to Bridges to Health for services to individuals who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. Four, $1 million to the Department for Children and Families for the distribution of grants to municipalities, planning and implementing services for households at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness in collaboration with the community action agency serving a municipality's region. B, the department shall report on the distribution of appropriations made in this section pursuant to Section 5B1B of this Act. VHEARTH transition, new heading. Section 9, VHEARTH transition between July 1st, 2025 and July 1st, 2026, pursuant to a mutual agreement between the department and a community action agency or the statewide organization serving households experiencing domestic or sexual violence. Specific elements of the Vermont of VHEARTH may take effect prior to July 1st, 2026, subject to 1, 30-day notice to affected households, 2, 30-day notice to the Joint Fiscal Committee, House Committee on Human Services, and Senate Committee on Health and Welfare. And 3, posted notice on the department's website. I'm going to hand you the last bit.
So what follows were the proposed effective dates that all this would have gone into place had the bill passed. The act would have taken effect on July 1st, 2025, except that 1, Section 4 of the VHEARTH program shall take effect on July 1st, 2026. However, specific elements of the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing program may be implemented prior to that date pursuant to Section 9. 2, Section 7, Community Action Agencies shall take effect on July 1st, 2026. And 3, the Department of Children and Families shall commence the rulemaking process prior to July 1st, 2026, in order to have rules in place on that date. So, folks, that is H.91. And I'm going to pause here. So
it was a mouthful.
It was a mouthful.
Let's be clear.
I have a little more to say, but quickly, just for if you're listening on WVEW LP Brattleboro, this is the end of the happy hour. This is all the time we have for today. But check out the online podcast version of the show because I think Leah and I have a little bit more to talk about. And on that note, hey, everybody, have a great weekend. Thank you to BCTV for taking the video version of the show. sharing it with media centers across the state. And in a future episode, we'll be talking with some of the people who made this bill. So if you have questions about the bill, send an email to the montpelierhappyhour@gmail.com, and I'll try to pass those questions on to my next interviewees. Thank you, everyone. So, Leah, quickly, yes, we can take off the glasses now. Just reading through that bill, it was a mouthful. Um, but was there anything that stood out for you as you were going through the bill?
Given how many different things are intended with this bill, I was very surprised that it was $7 million at the end that was mentioned.
Was that more than you expected or less than you expected?
$7 million is maybe the price of a few high-end homes in Vermont, and therefore, as a rubric, it doesn't seem like that amount of money would cover the intentions of the bill. And I'm not saying it should be higher or the intention should be lower. I'm just saying the money and the intention seem pretty off base with each other.
It stood out to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think what stood out for me is, having covered the Vermont's housing climate for so long and hearing a variety of people talk about what's causing different issues and different push and pull and pressures on the system. Mm-hmm. What stood out to me with this bill was it really felt like someone was sitting there going, okay, problem number one, what can we do to address that? Problem number two. Like, I really liked that one of the data points they were supposed to collect was if someone goes into permanent housing and then becomes homeless again, like why? Mm-hmm. And that felt like a really important question to me, because that would really show what perhaps in the system as a whole isn't working.
Yeah, the reporting requirements. Mm-hmm. I definitely wanted to know the answers to those questions. I would love if we used any money right now, because obviously this isn't going forward right now. Mm-hmm. If we were to make just a small measure at the moment, I would love to see like a statewide survey answering some of the serious burning questions. And that may exist. So if it does, please email Olga, because I am also a journalist and I would love to see that. But yeah, something that really explains the degrees to which people are slipping or overcoming too, mm-hmm. because I don't hear many stories about people who were down and then were able to get a little help and then got back on track. And I think that there are some, but yes, it would mean everything to me to know really what the rates are of the different categories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my curiosity question based on what you just said would be, yes, I'm sure there are people who have experienced homelessness and have found permanent housing and kept permanent housing. But my curiosity question is it perhaps one of the issues that number is smaller than the number who are losing housing? Does that make sense? And
when it works, what is it that made it work? Mm-hmm. Was it something like getting the mental health assistance they needed, getting some assistance with addiction, or simply getting a little money to get themselves back on their feet? Because we've heard stories like that too, where someone said, I just needed a certain amount of time to get going again and I was okay. So yeah, I would love to know, like, when it does work, right? We talk so much about our problems, mm-hmm. but one of the other ways to look at our issues, not just locally, but nationally, is when something works, when there is something that works out, like what are the trends within those solutions so that we can recognize that and hopefully maximize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one thing that makes supporting people who are experiencing homelessness really tricky, is because for a whole group of people, the outcome might be the same in that they don't have housing. However, all the dominoes that fell before they were out of housing may not be the exact same dominoes. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's one thing that can make it hard for people to get their arms around the housing issue.
Yeah, but understanding what is working, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe nothing is, but I suspect some things are working, that some methods are working better than others in addressing. And I'm not sure, as a journalist, I've studied income inequality in particular,
Right.
for
Yeah.
example, and asking which communities are solving this better is a great question because when you go and check out what those places are, you get all these different things that you can maybe use and bring back home.
Hmm.
And so I love the idea of like, what's working? Of all the things, what are the better ones?
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel a little more positive too.
Well, I think that's a really good point in that we've seen some legislation I have read will actually say we want whoever we're doling out the work to, we want you to look at other communities and do like a compare and contrast and what's
Mm-hmm.
working. And it's a good point that I don't think that was in here anywhere. So that would be a question I would ask the folks who built the bill is why not?
Yeah, yeah. Let's find out what's working. There are things working.
Hmm.
There are things working here in Vermont, and it'd be so good to know what those things are and how we recreate that or expand on it, right?
Right.
Like amplify.
Yeah. Or what do other rural communities do when they're trying to meet their housing needs?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what are our force multipliers? That's the curiosity question
Hmm.
for me.
Another thing in this bill that I found intriguing, and listeners have heard me say this, that one thing I think Vermont is always balancing is because we have such a small population,
Mm-hmm.
we it can be hard to find economies of scale. So the best economy of scale is actually often at the state level, but between our tradition of local control and kind of the variations in all Vermont communities, the state may not always have the best
Mm-hmm.
perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one thing I find intriguing is making the community action agencies sort of the holders of the flame
Mm-hmm.
in each
Mm-hmm.
region. I found that very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like they would then coordinate, then they will coordinate with, like in Brattleboro, Roundworks, Sevka,
Mm-hmm.
um, different food pantries, that type of thing.
Yes.
Any other curiosity questions at this time, honey?
I think those are my main ones. I feel like those are good. I'm curious what those, and it's made me really think about it. I do think if I'm going to offer one more thing, that's
Mm-hmm.
my if I was going to be a little bit of a critic, sorry, got
Nope.
to be a little bit of a
You
critic.
got to be both. You got to be the cheerleader and the critic. We
Um,
hold both positions.
yeah. So if I'm going to be a little bit of a critic, it seems like it's very chock-a-block with lots of what I would call bureaucratic layers
Oh, yes.
and
Yes.
a lot of room for either professionals to be involved or advisory boards and then knock on of many other different layers. And I think maybe it could be seen as a little top heavy in terms of a lot of cooks in this kitchen.
Mm,
And if these people are being compensated or it's their job or, it really does sort of take us to a place where that local control that you're describing. Ideally, it would be great if it could be sort of like a private um, public partnership where, people in the community are contributing their time, efforts, whatever, whether it's working at a local soup kitchen
mhm,
or donating clothes or just finding out who are our local community members who are struggling. Like, let's try to help them because we want to help them. They're members of this community,
mhm,
particularly those who are at risk of homelessness. It'd be nice if there was sort of like a neighborhood watch of at risk of homelessness so that we could,
mhm,
just do what we could all do on a community level and a local level to help people. Um, I love the idea of being like, hey, I'll cover my neighbor's heating bills up to a certain amount of money every winter, or I'll help contribute, like it would be nice if there could be sort of a little bit more of a arrangement of, you know, individuals helping other individuals because we want to,
mhm,
and not it being all about this like heavy bureaucratic layered thing, this top down thing, because I really think bottoms up is one of the things Vermont's very good at.
mm, mhm,
And it'd be nice if we kind of allowed for some of that magic too. But we do need some organization surrounding how do we find out about people who need it?
Right.
Like, is there a list?
And someone to gather the data, which I think will be very important in this process.
Yeah, like we had a neighborhood list during COVID of in my neighborhood in Brattleboro, we had a list that went around of it literally had two columns. It said needs, like who has needs and where do they live, and then who can offer and where do they live. And everybody signed up on offer and nobody signed up on need.
Which
And
is also a very Vermont thing.
yeah, and this was, I lived in what I would call a very, it was not a highly affluent section of town. It was what I would call like very straight down the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
Not struggling, definitely not on the top level. I would say small single family homes, which is what I was living in. And no one in the neighborhood had a need they wanted to explain they had or that they wanted anyone to fulfill, but everybody signed up for offering. And I remember thinking, that's amazing. I mean, like, and if that's the case in that neighborhood, then I would imagine that's the case in many neighborhoods where there could even be like sort of a, it's our neighborhood. Let's keep track of who has some needs in our individual neighborhoods to limit those who slip through the cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's really beautiful. The curiosity question that then comes up for me is, one thing about trauma and crisis and losing your housing is you can, like, you were definitely in a community and that list was being shared with the community. But what happens to people who lose their community? And then is it something like a state agency needs to step in? Does that make sense? I'm curious about that. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, if you're at risk, you may have a community, but you're at risk. So there's a community ideally. Or, some people are really rural and they're more isolated. So there could be a way, not necessarily to where you had to do an official gathering of data, but where maybe there's like certain streets grouped together, like, hey, can we try to create something here? But you're right. Like if you've already slipped through the cracks, but you're somebody who's in Vermont, then that would probably require something like these community action agencies, right? Somebody who could come in, but we could limit the number of people going to them if we could like catch people before they fall, right?
I think that is such a great point. And one of my concerns about so many of our systems, state and federal, is that they really want you to be completely in the gutter before, rather than catch someone before they before they lose their housing. They're like, oh yeah, you can lose your housing first and then we'll help you. Which I think is a weakness in our social safety net, actually. And it's counterintuitive, but then it's not when you start looking at like what it costs to bring someone back. Who has slipped through the cracks. Yeah.
Yes.
Anything else before we go?
I think that's it. That was very educational for me.
Yeah, I really encourage people to check out different pieces of legislation. And it is very wordy, but when you look through it and how it's arranged, you can kind of see like, okay, I see how this piece is connected here. And they're saying this every single time to make sure it's clear, like who they're looking for, who they're looking to serve. So on that note, folks, hey, thanks for sticking around for the longer part of our conversation and the Montpelier Happy Hour. We'll be back next week. Take care, everyone.
Take care.